everybody. Welcome to Web on Wednesday. My name is Martijn Lofvers. I'm a Chief Trendwatcher of Supply Chain Media. I'm also the Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Movement, a quarterly magazine and a bi-weekly newsletter, and a huge LinkedIn group all around the world, and also architect of the SCM IT Sublab. And I have the honor of speaking to Don Hicks the next hour. So I will introduce him right after this. But it will be great, we'll have an interesting conversation with a lot of knowledge about network design and supply chain. So we will talk about democratizing design, supply chain design specifically. And Don is expecting a huge tsunami coming, and that we're going to discuss. All right. So you can see me here on the left. That's me. And on the right, you see Don Hicks. He's also on camera. Hi, Don.
Hi, Martin. How are you?
I'm fine. So, Don, you are the president and CEO of Optilogic, also a founder. Before that, you're also a founder of LlamaSoft, and you have a background in simulation. So, you have been around, I would say.
I have been around. That's true.
And you also an owner of a jazz club.
That is also true. The Blue Llama Jazz Club. I believe we may be the only supply chain software tech company that has a sister company as a jazz club. I can tell you our training and customer events are the best in the world.
I can imagine. So why jazz? So I think, is there a link between jazz and supply chain or business?
Yeah, Martin and I, and by the way, thanks for having me on the podcast. Hi, everybody that's out there. I'm looking forward to a good spirited discussion today. And we got lots of time for talk and for questions.
Yeah.
But it's a great place to kick it off, actually, for a lot of reasons. I do have a jazz club. It's my honor to be the proprietor of this thing. Look, I love music. It's not unique. There's a lot of folks in technology that also play instruments and play music. But the way to think about it, because you're asking about jazz specifically, I love all types of music, but I find that jazz really speaks to me, but it also, as a metaphor, really relates to what people are going through in the modern tech world, either as an entrepreneur or as a supply chain executive. And I'll use it to contrast the view of jazz and then classical music. And in classical music, we're all familiar with Mozart and Haydn and Beethoven. It's incredible music. And all the parts are written down and they're distributed to the orchestra and all the members. And their job is to play their part and play it perfectly. Follow the orchestra, the conductor. And if everybody plays their part correctly, you make beautiful music. And in jazz, people often think about jazz as being characterized by improvising and making it all up. And that is, there's...
Yeah. All right. So you're talking about jazz. It's about improvising, and I was listening and also looking to the connection. So I just mentioned this. So maybe you can comment on this. We have discussed it before, but maybe what's your take? What you are experiencing in your market when you look at these kind of disruptions?
Yeah. Thank you for that, and sorry for the disruption. However that happened. The fact is that this is not an exclusive list of all of the things you're facing, because these are the things just that we know about now, but so many of these things were unknown as disruptions 4 or 5 or 6 years ago. And that is the nature of risk management and supply chain. Is there are the things that you know and that you can kind of plan for, but the biggest disruptions are going to come from things you just don't know about. And that makes the case that you can never get everything perfectly figured out. You have to have the ability to respond to unusual and unknown events in the future. So, what we're seeing in the U.S., we see the effects of all of these, but those effects are not predictable either. No. We had at one point in time disruptions and shortages in the Pacific. The key, the biggest inbound port locations in the United States. But then we ended up having shortages and labor shortages on the East Coast of the United States. And it had to do with the interconnectedness of the network. Right now, a problem anywhere in the world might cause a problem for you in ways you don't understand, because these supply chains are still global and interconnected.
Yeah. But maybe, with this kind of visualization, it would be good for companies to visualize its cause and effects in such a way, and we'll talk about simulation later on, because
Yes,
things are changing, and you have to visualize it to understand it.
well, that's quite right, and that's a good starting point. I think people are very, very surprised when they start to realize just how interconnected they are. And there's a common illusion out there these days, Martin, that if you just go it alone and become completely self-sufficient. In the United States, we like to talk about being completely self-sufficient and let's just withdraw from our interconnectedness, and it is simply not possible.
No.
When you go up your supply network 2-3 vendors, what happens in sub-Saharan Africa, what happens in Southeast Asia, it's going to affect you. You cannot just isolate yourself.
All right, and we will talk about it later, and we will talk about network design, etc. So basically, I told the others already. I've been the architect of this IT supermap since 2011. All the ERP WMS vendors who are established in Europe are on there. And Optilogic has also been on there since I think 1 or 2 years, because you moved over from US into Europe. There's a question. So why are we talking Don Hicks at Optilogic? So what happened to LlamaSoft? Maybe you can relate to that a bit.
What happened to LlamaSoft? That should be its own podcast. Probably a multi-part series, because it was a great company for many years.
Mm-hmm.
When I started LlamaSoft in 1998, it was a one-person company.
Yeah.
And I grew with it. I figured, Martin, it would take a year and a half to finish coding up a supply chain simulator.
Mm-hmm.
And 20 years later, I was still there working at LlamaSoft as the CEO, and we had about 500 people. And I'm really proud of LlamaSoft's journey. As we tried to expand, we started in network design, but eventually what we saw was there's a lot more to analysis and modeling and design in all aspects. And some of those we're going to talk about in a little bit. But when it was really after 20 years, it's too much time. I needed a break. Everybody needed a break. So I sold the company to a private equity group led by TPG.
Mm-hmm.
And those guys flipped some new management in there. And about 2 or 3 years later, in the middle of COVID, they flipped the company to a public company called Coupa that is in the business spend management space. In fact, they're highly regarded in business management, spend management, touching on procurement. Yep. And Coupa wanted to get into the supply chain area, and they thought that they knew enough that they could manage it, and they acquired LlamaSoft, my understanding, and I had no involvement with that. I was long out. But my understanding was that they were under the impression they were buying an integrated design and planning platform. And they probably needed to do a few more demos and kick the tires a little bit more. Yeah. When they bought that company a couple of years ago in the middle of pandemic, one of the first things they did was mass layoffs and firings. And I got to tell you, a software company without its best talent is not a software company at all. And subsequently, hundreds and hundreds of people have left. There are still a few great employees left there at Coupa's supply chain. And I'm actually rooting for them. The world needs more good supply chain tech solutions. But a number one rule of any company is you got to take care of your employees, and you got to value them, and you got to retain them. And if you drive them out or do mass summary executions, you shouldn't expect to hold on to your leadership. So, they're on their path now. I wish them well. In the meantime, I started this company called Optilogic to go make a platform to do operations research. And we saw the disaster unfolding with Coupa LlamaSoft, and decided when it was time, perhaps we could hire some of that amazing talent and go make a next generation supply chain design platform, which is what we did. Okay, right. And it's been a straight shot since then.
Yeah, and as you see here on this IT super map with the it's in the cloud, with the
that's right.
Yeah. All right.
It is built to the ground up in the cloud, 100%.
Yeah. getting back to this ripple effects, and it's a
Yes.
turbulent times, that kind of stuff. So what is needed to survive and thrive?
Well, this is one of the people have asked what are the lasting lessons of COVID, and I guess it's like every other important lesson, it's something we need to relearn. Um, During the pandemic, what it showed, and I think everybody would agree with this, was that the supply chains around the world were not designed with risk in mind. Okay, the supply chain, you had folks that had spent 20 years optimizing their supply chains, trying to drive costs down, the drive to efficiency, eliminate redundancy. And there was a real focus on short term and planning.
Yeah.
And you can tell when you look at how much money has been spent on visibility and execution, on consolidating the data. And what we saw is those systems were working well without those major disruptions. But suddenly, when you're faced with pandemic, all of those same decisions seems to backfire.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to highlight here, and certainly this is the Optilogic mission, is that yes, companies today have to make the best out of their current supply chain. They have to drive operational excellence through better planning decisions, utilizing data, utilizing AI to improve their current operation, but you are also bounded. You are stuck with the supply chain you're currently operating, and that may not be the supply chain you need.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this other activity about supply chain design, which means looking ahead and deciding explicitly what is the supply chain that I should be moving towards, given big changes that are coming down the road. You can't plan your way out of a bad design. And also the design of your supply chain, which is, it's not just the structure, but all of the elements in the supply chain, the structure, the policies, how these components interact. That design has evolved. It came along through adaptation to the network and the environment that you're in now. But that may not be, and in fact, it almost certainly isn't what you need in the future to thrive under change, under climate change, under disruptions, under who knows what's going to happen next. And so one of the core takeaways I want to make sure that folks get across here is that companies, they can't choose, should I focus on planning or should I focus on design? They are equally important. They are different mission critical functions. Planning makes the best of your current supply chain, and design lets you look ahead and create the supply chain you're going to need. And that improves all aspects of planning. These are independent but related mission critical functions. And what we see is the best companies in the world, those that are able to not only respond to macro changes, but exploit macro changes. Those companies are going to not only survive, but they're going to thrive and outcompete. And if you don't get on board with this and you don't have a design capability, you really are just waiting to be knocked out.
Yeah, and if you look at this, there's lots of been talking about resilience. How does resilience fit in this schema?
Sure. Well, we like to think of it that they're sort of the three main components. If you look at and think of a supply chain design as a system that has, whether or not it is explicitly or accidentally designed, it's a system that is supposed to deliver some amount of performance. It's supposed to transport the materials to the customers in the right place, in the right quantity, in the right time, in the right manner. Okay. And that's a service element, but you're trading off service and cost. If you can deliver better service at a cheaper cost, great, do that. Most of the time, you are balancing service and financial risk. And then there's financial performance, cost. But there's a third element, which is risk. And what design is trying to do is to help you understand and quantify, where do I sit in my trade-offs between service, financials, and the risk element. So you mentioned the word resilience, and resilience really is more of the robust systems capability to respond and to come back stronger, to to bounce back and handle disruptions. It's the flip side of risk. Risk meaning the downside, the uncertainty and the downside of disruption. A well-designed supply chain has resilience built in, because resilience means that you have identified your weak points and you have either a plan or, in fact, backups and contingencies so that you can bounce back from a disruptive risk. And you can see companies that load up on risk and haven't modeled on out and haven't examined their systemic risk, they can't be resilient. Okay, it's just an accident. But companies that are managing risk and making a decision to offset that risk, they are naturally going to be resilient and stronger and outcompete in times of great change. And I think your theme here, Martin, which is spot on, is that we are in a time of tremendous great change now. And honestly, looking ahead, I don't see it settling down.
No. Okay, let's talk about a bit deeper about supply chain design. Tell me a bit more. What is it, in your opinion?
Right. So, there's a lot of different ideas about this, and we kick around network design. And if you go back into the past, network design was a subset of overall supply chain planning. It was really focused on optimizing the nodes and arcs and structure of the supply chain, and it would solve capital problems, capital costs. And the what has happened over the last really last 10 years is that because of increase in computing, because of advances in both the software and the hardware side, you now have the ability to bring together data from all different sources of your supply chain. And there is no one, there's a lot of efforts out there to do things like data lakes and to do visibility solutions. And what these companies are trying to do is to get all of that data together so you kind of have one view of the truth. Okay, that's a great thing to do. But remember that you're really pulling together data to create a virtual model of your current system. But the thing is, supply chain design is about the future. And what you need to do is to extend that model and expand your view to model on out a supply chain that you don't have yet. So add in alternatives that you haven't used, implement new lanes, try different ways of doing business. And you can test out and optimize your future state supply chain in the computer, in a software environment, before you go try to roll out those changes. It makes it safe to innovate. So if you look at it like that, supply chain design is much, much broader than operating or looking at your current network. And I really want to make this point. We at Optilogic partner up. We don't compete with the planning vendors that are out there that you're using to run your business. We are the CAD software that let you continually design and redesign the future state supply chain. And it's not just warehouse locations, but really any aspect. And think about how powerful that is to be able to look ahead, get the supply chain you need at all levels of detail, actually, and then you can prepare contingencies as well as a most likely plan of what you're going to do.
There has been a lot been talking about digital twin in the supply chain, and as I see it, you can have a digital twin on a machine level, on a warehouse level, where you design, and then you have actual real-time data or almost real-time data, and on a network level, you can have a digital twin. So how does a digital twin fit in your picture?
Well, we understand, and I sort of enjoy the digital twin, but it's more like a bad copy or a partial copy. And a lot of digital twinning has been basically marketing nonsense. Okay, there is such a thing as creating a virtual representation. I totally agree with that. But these companies, when they're doing these, you're not actually creating a twin of the entire supply chain. You don't have all the data. And even if you did, a digital representation is not identical to reality. It is a simplification. And I get a little jazzed up here because a lot of vendors like to use the name or the word digital twin, and they imply that they have a complete representation of the supply chain. And it's what we call in the United States bullshit. It's not true. It is powerful, by the way, to take a subset of the data and create what we used to call and still call a model, a representation, a simplified representation digitally of some aspect. And you cited some of the very, very best, really powerful applications of that digital twinning technology, which is to take current state data, put it in an execution environment from an execution environment, and then be able to analyze it and create dashboards. But the thing of it is that modeling technology is incomplete. And in our case, in design, we're not trying to make a digital twin of today. We're trying to make a digital twin of tomorrow. We want to make a copy or a virtual representation of a supply chain you're thinking about doing or thinking about those changes. It's such a key distinction. Planning and execution, focusing on making a representation and a twin of what you have today, but it doesn't help you with new things. It doesn't help you add in alternatives or different business practices and then try that out. That's in the design space.
Clear,
both necessary.
Yeah, maybe you can tell a bit more, so what supply chain design can do for a company.
Sure, of course. So the simplest way to say it is, imagine a power where you can more or less answer any question about the future supply chain. Mm-hmm. You can take that step back and look at the full picture, but I really want to focus on the what if aspect. That is to say, I've got a supply chain. I undoubtedly, my team are always thinking about how can I change and improve this network, but they're restricted because in many ways, historically, the only way to know would be to go try it out or give it your best guess. And in supply chain, our jobs mean that we are managing physical networks. When we make mistakes, when we make a bad decision, trucks go to the wrong location, factories shut down, lines stop working, and workers get furloughed because of lack of inbound supplies. There are real consequences. We operate in the physical world, and we are bound by the laws of physics. And the stakes are very high for us in logistics and supply chain. So what we're trying to do first off is simply give you the environment where you can test out these ideas in a risk-free, cost-free environment. But that's really only the start of it, because you can apply optimization algorithms can generate alternatives and generate new possibilities. And then the net effect of all of that is to make it that you can shift out that efficiency curve and get the network you're going to need to operate well in the new environment. And we're in an environment now, Martin, where we see one of the defining characteristics of the current global space, I would call deglobalization. Mm-hmm. You see countries and regions pulling apart economically and focusing on a smaller, generally a more physically close network of countries that operate on the same sets of rules. And that has massive implications, because the supply chains for the largest couple thousand companies, really all of these companies that are doing manufacturing and distribution, we've got dependencies that operated in a globalization approach, a globalized world. And you see companies in the United States right now are openly saying, we have to get out of China. We think that the risk of doing business in China is way too great. And even though we've become dependent and it's less expensive, I've got to get out, because they view that the risk is possibly existential. Now, how do you do that, though, in reality? How do you model that? The answer is to design your way out. Yeah. What does that network look like for the next 10 years? And what is my path towards, in the United States? We talk about reshoring, and in Europe, where obviously we're very worried about our energy dependence, and what does it mean if Eastern Europe pulls away from Western Europe? And gosh, there's so many different things to think about. You've got to be modeling these out and getting contingency plans. And that is what supply chain design lets you do. It lets you have a plan and get your intentions straight, so you can take advantage of these changes that are coming. You can surf those waves instead of being destroyed by them. It is mission critical.
As you can see, companies that are moving out or investing less in China. I think still a lot of suppliers are still out there in China, and
Yes.
China is still one of the major factories of the world. But a lot of Chinese companies are also opening sites in Vietnam, so you can order your stuff from a Chinese company in Vietnam, and then you are less vulnerable for Chinese regulations, that kind of stuff. So that's changing. But my notion is, 10 years ago, supply chain network design was, where should I open a warehouse, or what, where is the best place to have a factory? But that's more like taking a picture and then do some calculations, and then it's okay. My best next place would be to open up a factory, say in Eastern Europe. But that's quite static. What you are describing is a more dynamic way of thinking, and more in like assimilating the future. So that's a
Yeah,
more dynamic approach.
Martin, you hit the nail on the head right there, which is, if you go back through the history of this, network design was really just another way of talking about one specific math modeling technique. There's a
Yep.
mathematical modeling approach called mixed integer linear programming.
Yep.
And what happens really is you take any network, and it doesn't have to be supply chain, but that's the most common application. You can model it out using nodes and arcs and convert everything into flow. So instead of having orders and shipments, I make a math model, and I require that the amount of flow into a node is the same as the flow going out of the node. And it's a really powerful approach because it takes a complex network and it makes it tractable and solvable by powerful optimization algorithms. That sounds great, and it is great. But the problem is, it's not very realistic. You take away the time element, you take away randomness and stochastics. And the biggest thing is, you don't actually have orders and shipments. It's all sort of, you put all of your products and shipments in a blender, and you turn it into puree, and then you squirt it through tubes from node to node. That's the way to think of mixed integer linear programming. And what gets us a little torqued up is there are software vendors out there that represent that they model your supply chain, but the only thing they do is mixed integer linear programming. And that is unsatisfactory. It is unsuitable. It does not calculate service. How can you determine if a change to your network is good or bad if you don't know the resulting service? And some of these guys that are out there, and their job, I understand it, is to sell you software. So these legacy companies that all they have is an optimization, a math optimization, they'll come up with misrepresentations about service. They'll say, oh, well, we can calculate service because we'll tell you what percentage of your customers are within a 2-day circle of your warehouse. But nobody measures service like that, Martin. People measure service based on what percentage of my products and my orders got to my customer on time in the mode that they requested. That's service. And if all you have is an optimization tool, you are deceiving your customers, and you're deceiving yourself if you think that that is suitable in the modern world to design the network. You can't have only one technique. Different techniques are needed and give you different things. Optimization will give you an optimal cost-based structure subject to constraints, but it does not tell you service. You need to use a simulation technique or some of these inventory modeling techniques that incorporate stochastics that can tell you, if I make this change, what service will result. And here's the third part. Even when you do those things, they don't tell you what's the risk. What did I load up on? We at Optilogic built our own risk rating engine and embedded it in our software. So every time you run a network optimization, you also get a risk rating on that network. And look, I'm very proud of what we did, but I think everyone in the field ought to be taking this technique. But they're too busy trying to sell you, 10, 20, and in some cases 30-year-old software packages, and they don't tell you about the downsides. And I think that is not ethical.
Okay, clear. But maybe you can talk a bit more. about what kind of level should you address this? Because I think that makes it more practical for the audience to see, okay, what should you address?
Sure. And this is, I think, a continuation of the discussion point, because really, if all you have is a flow model,
Yeah.
then you really can't model business policies. You can't model what the difference between running these set of SKUs on this line or that set of SKUs on that line. So you can do high level questions, but you cannot actually model or provide insight at a detailed level. Now, modern supply chain design packages have multiple engines, and they can be used to analyze change at every level of detail. And I got to tell you, I think many companies are still confused about this, and as they should be confused based on the nonsense that software vendors are kicking out. If you can't push orders and shipments, if you can't model a new network and have individual orders get processed to see which ones will be late, your supply chain design software isn't really design software. It's a math trick.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that it is useless, but I am saying that it is not sufficient. You cannot make changes to a supply chain without having the capability to model out what will happen in individual orders and shipments. And this technology, we talk about the fact that this has been around, it's only in the last 10 years. Well, I mean, 10 to 15 years, we started to get these breakthroughs. And I actually date it back to when we made that last shift to larger CPUs. Okay. That has really unlocked things, that and the amount of memory that you can access. It's made it that you can simulate large networks at the detail level. That is now a standard capability. It's not cutting edge, really. It's not science fiction. It's just standard. And the last part is, and this is some of our reason for why we've bet on making all of our technology cloud native, is because sometimes these kinds of network modeling approaches are pretty small, but sometimes you'll have to model the entire theater, and it becomes a very, very, very large model. You have to be able to have hardware on demand to dial up. I need a bigger machine. Oh, I need a machine actually with 256 gigabytes of RAM. Oh, I need a 512 gigabyte RAM. If you are having to make those decisions and manage that yourself because you're stuck with workstation software, those are not, it seems like science fiction. I'm like, I couldn't possibly model orders and shipments. But with cloud technology, it puts hardware, scalable hardware, instantly at demand. And so I hit a model, it turns out really big. I ought to be able to just flip a dial and run it on larger hardware. And that is available for anybody who has made a modern cloud-based infrastructure. But so many of these companies are, including my former company, sadly, are still stuck in this sort of workstation client server legacy network because that's what they have. They haven't been able to rewrite and reinvent themselves using modern technology. And I'm making the point because technology here, the advancements have made it that you can design supply chains at a detailed level, as detailed as you want. You can model behavior. You can model production policies. You can model scheduling and do what ifs at every level. That is powerful. And companies that are doing this have much less to fear about the future. And if you're not doing this, you're just sitting around, waiting for the end to get you. Yeah. It's that dramatic for me.
Yeah. No, it's good to mention, that you, even on an SKU level, a stock keeping unit level, you can design flows and to see what's happening, and also what the behavior of your customers and your suppliers. You can have a better understanding how it will play out or possibly play out in the future when things are happening.
I want to change a business rule that says, when do I expedite, or when do I go to my backup source? How do I do that if all I have is a MIP? I can't do it because it doesn't model that. I hate to keep beating up on MIPS. We love MIPS. We have it in our software, obviously, but it's only one part of the puzzle. And if that's all you have to know you're missing out. And it's so important, Martin, because many people are under the impression that supply chain design is something you do once a year or something you do once every 3 years. That is old-fashioned, dangerous thinking. You are behind the times if that's what you think. And if you wake up, you see, supply chain design means I am doing this all the time for any what if at any level of detail, tactical, operational, day to day. I can test these things out. And that capability runs in parallel to planning. I'm running the network, and my design group is constantly redesigning it from micro level of detail on the plant floor to macro level of detail in an integrated global supply chain.
So as I understand it, it will change. On the left, you saw it like it used to be. There's a staff function who's doing this once every year or maybe every half year, but that will change.
It's certainly what we see. Our companies and our clients that we work with, they're not doing an annual exercise. They have a long list, a never-ending list. And sometimes things come out of nowhere. That's called disruptions, where your design team ends up being able to handle new questions. And this is, I want to double, triple underline this as one of the main points of my discussion here. And that is supply chain design is the ability to answer any question about today or tomorrow's supply chain. However, supply chain design needs to be thought about as a corporate capability that enables teams to tackle a never-ending set of questions. Okay, it's a really important mind shift. It's not about doing one project. I mean, that's great. You do one project, you get an answer. But the future is always changing. Risks are always evolving. Your company needs to think of supply chain design as a corporate function, a mission-critical supply chain design team that can keep answering questions as they arise in real time. That's design. It's continuous supply chain design. And that's what we see the most advanced companies out there doing, continually tackling change as it happens.
And then distributed all through the company.
And that's the next part, actually. Yeah. So, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I'll just share with you, we empower individuals to be able to be successful with supply chain design. But where you get the big benefit for companies is enabling teams to tackle this. And then what happens, Martin, if you ask executives, most executives that I talk to, the senior executives, they're very aware of supply chain design, and that many of them are aware that you can model just about anything, but they get very worried about the dependence on a few experts. And what we talk about is designing a team-based function so that whether it's a center of excellence approach or a distributed set of teams, these guys can collaborate, and then you can scale up your ability to do design as you need to. But you just touched on the third element, which is if I have a design capability in my company, what can I do to maybe let anyone in the enterprise access that power? And the way to think of it is your teams are professionals. Your supply chain design team is going to be made of dedicated professionals. Some of them work directly for you. Some of them are contractors, but you have your team of experts. Imagine what could happen if everybody in the enterprise could access the power of those models, the power of optimizing and simulating decisions without having to learn the software, without having to become a professional. This is the breakthrough that we've done at Optilogic, is to take design and turn it into a true enterprise platform that can drive the back end of distributed applications throughout the enterprise. Imagine being able that anybody in your entire company can use the power of simulation or optimization without having to even know that they're running a model. That is what we're doing, and that's what we've brought to the market. And we think it is transformative. in terms of the effect it has on your company.
Maybe you can give some examples. What kind of questions the people around the organization can ask?
Sure. I'll give you. Let's think about any one of these applications here. Let's say so we have a company in the U.S. that we're working with here, a very, very large, a sort of a Fortune 200 level retailer. I just looked at the first lily pad up there, routing applet. We have this local company here in Michigan, but they're national, and they built a pretty complicated, a sophisticated model that says, when I make a change to the network, I want to rerun it, and then I want to regenerate what are the routes that my trucks are going to run. It's a straightforward thing. If I shift some of my SKUs from one warehouse to another warehouse, what will the impact be on transportation costs? That's a really important question. With these guys, they model it out using design software, using Cosmic Frog, which is our flagship product, and they're able to optimize the SKUs and then immediately get the resulting routes. And those are often different from the routes they're running today. That's great. That's a powerful design application. But this company has taken it further. They said, okay, well, I want to use this model every day, but I don't want to have my actual routing and dispatch people trying to access this software front end. Can't you just give me an Excel spreadsheet where I can paste in today's mix, today's deliveries, and then see what happens? And we said, yeah, in fact, if you're comfortable with Excel, we'll just build the Excel front end and use the same model that you've been using. So the design, they have a design group. They did the analysis and they were able to do the study, but then it transitioned into deploying that application, but they didn't have to deploy it because it's in the cloud. All they had to do was tie together a spreadsheet front end. They more or less put it on their servers. They could email it around. And when the people in their company throughout the actual management function, when they want to run a scenario, they just open up their spreadsheet, which they're used to using. They paste in or make some changes, and then they run the model on the back end on our cloud-based platform. They didn't even know that they ran routing and optimization in a sequential approach. They just push the button and then they get the data out, and it is giving them the ability, like a crystal ball, to see the future. That is incredibly powerful, and it's not future state. This is what companies are doing today, answering these questions and distributing it to everybody in the enterprise.
I see a lot of cool applications on this leaflets in the pond. What about an SNOP feasibility applet? What does that mean?
Sure. So, sales and operations planning, it's where we're trying to bring together, we're looking ahead. Every company is doing this. Whether or not they're doing it well is a different matter. But almost every company that's especially doing production, you put together a sales forecast, you put together a sales and revenue plan, and then you need to connect that and say, well, is this actually, what does this mean for my manufacturing? It's typically used as a process to drive capacity planning, rough cut capacity planning. The thing gets handed off later on to manufacturing. And one of the problems here, Martin, is that in many times, if you start to get tight on capacity, you really don't know, is my actual high level production plan going to be feasible for my organization? The only way to do that is to actually model out the back end and model out capacity more down at the line level, and to model capacity accurately, you end up having, in some cases, to have major changeovers, minor changeovers, and get down to individual machine capacities. It really depends on your industry. But that model, let's assume you're in an industry where you need to model capacity to a high level degree of accuracy and precision. Well, that would be an amazing, powerful tool for anybody who is on the factory, who is doing factory level planning. But what are you going to do? You're going to send it on out, have everybody become an expert in running the models? Better would be I have my design team put the model in the cloud, put it on Atlas, which is our underlying platform, and then put a front end on it so that anybody can do quick what ifs using what would look like a complicated model on the back end, But on the front end, it's just Excel. That app lets you tap into the powerful back-end modeling. That is just think about how powerful that is. You don't have to settle for high-level approximation when your calculator, and it looks like might look like an Excel macro, your calculator is actually running a detailed factory level model, multi-production facilities to test out the feasibility of your current production plan. That's unbelievable. And each one of these is deep. And I guess I'll say one last thing and then kick it over to you on this. The fact is, these are the easy ones. These are the things we know about. But what we believe at Optilogic is that our design platform is going to be used by people to fill in the gaps between their planning systems, between the applications. You know, when you with your subway map, you've got the sort of a functional view of what problems vendors are trying to solve. These people are doing sourcing. These people are doing transportation planning. But in the real world, it's all connected. And nobody does it all. And what we see is many of the problems in supply chain planning and design right now are in the gaps and the soft spots between these app focus areas. And what we see with a design platform, because the modeling is so flexible, you can use it to fill in the gaps and to do a semi-bespoke, something that is not completely custom, but pretty close to just do this one-off problem that no vendor can address. Imagine if you've got the ability to use complex algorithms like duct tape without massive IT implementations. You can put together a model, give someone a quick front end, and then when the system changes, you can either update the model or you can throw it away because the costs are so much lower than deploying these god-awful legacy enterprise apps. We see the entire paradigm of enterprise supply chain computing potentially shifting to be much more flexible, much more resilient, much more supportive of change.
Yes. I think we mentioned all this, so I can skip this. You will distribute it in a way that you democratize the whole way of thinking about the supply chain design. We addressed it because for time's sake, we want to have a few things we want to address.
Yeah,
basically,
sure.
what you described, you have your apps, but also you have your Excels. And there's a lot of knowledge in those Excel. You don't want to get rid of it. You don't want it to throw away, but you want to make sure that it's more robust enough, and you can share it in a different way, and you can make the simulation out of it. So that's my summary of what you just described, and this picture will show it in the right way. And you mentioned you were predicting the whole tsunami of uses of supply chain design.
Yes, I think that is the underlying message here. In fact, I'll highlight the previous slide and this one. I'll highlight 2 points. The first one is there's nothing magical about Excel. Excel can be as good or as bad as it's used for. It's just a tool, but people are comfortable with it. And software companies, it's on us to bring our capabilities to where users are today, to bring our power to what they're comfortable doing instead of trying to demand that they get to use interfaces and software that they're not comfortable with, that they need tons of training. If you're comfortable with Excel, we'll bring the capabilities to you. Mm-hmm. And that enables what we're calling this democratization. To me, it means making sure that anybody in the company is as smart and as capable as your entire design team. If you're able to pull that off, and what we're seeing is our companies and our clients are successful with this. They're seeing this happening. That's what we talk about tsunami, because it really is a wave that is going to be changing the way companies design and plan and operate going forward. And that is the kind of impact we think that this is capable of delivering.
It makes totally sense, and I hope we will see it happen as you describe it. To wrap up, what I designed for myself, I think, a lot of companies, they are in a turmoil, a difficult situation, turbulent times. my recommendation is, first of all, visualize your ecosystem, not in the traditional way, like, you have a linear supply chain from raw material to manufacture to wholesale to retail, etc. But like this, design it like SimCity, where you see the flows of goods, of finance, and also of people possibly, but also getting more circular. We get into a circular world. So this is step one. But the next step is, and then you get to the disruptions, the bottlenecks, and also where you can find synergy. And I mentioned earlier with Don, we had a previous conversation. Professor Levy from MIT has created this world of, where do you find the possible risk upstream and how should you handle this? So what's your take when you look at this kind of ecosystem and the possible disruptions and bottlenecks and where you find synergies? How does it relate to your world of you have to design your supply chains in a different way?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a lot of the work that's out there with disruption. It sort of illustrates the problem of being sort of single-minded about your algorithms. Some of the work about modeling disruptions are basically an approach of knocking out, let's take our MIP and knock out one node, and then we'll take the same MIP and we'll knock out a different node. And while that's useful, it's incredibly short-sighted and limited, because you have to have a simulation capability, not just an optimization capability, so you can actually drop in disruptions over time and then see the ripple effects. And if all you have is a MIP, everything just looks like a structure problem. You have to be using different technologies. And I think people are wanting to do this work. They want to model for resilience. They want to understand disruptions, but you have to use the right tool, right job. And the fact is, if I want to know how my network's going to operate, if a change happens, I can't optimize. It's not an optimization problem. Optimization doesn't predict what will happen. Optimization tries to prescribe what you should do in terms of configuration. Both of those techniques are necessary. And I'd love to tell you that's a new development, Martin, but we've been preaching that for 25 years now, since I got started in LlamaSoft in 1998, of using simulation and optimization as part of your overall toolkit. And now, finally, almost the year 2025, I think we've got the solution.
Okay, that's good to know. Time-wise, we're almost on the hour, and unfortunately, because the small technical hiccup, we don't have more time for the Q&A. But the good news is, right after this, Don and I will be sitting down in a virtual lounge. So, if you have more questions, please join us in the lounge right after this. So we'll be there in the next 30 minutes. So we have an opportunity to extend this conversation to get in touch with you and answer your questions. So, there's more to read. You can download our ecosystem. You can even download a nice case about how Optilogic has been used, or is used in automotive. And there's also a Cosmic Frog demo to watch, but also you can all try it out.
Martin, it's not even a demo. Everybody has a free personal account. If you're interested, if you're a professional, you don't have to go to a salesperson. You don't have to prove yourself. Go get your free personal account. Work with the software. More people need to be doing design, not fewer. And there's no cost. Go ahead and get on the software and try it out for yourself.
Yeah, and I think, also for students, we'll try it out, because I think, the next generation should be aware, this kind of disruptions and volatility on both demand and supply side won't go away for the next 5 to 10 years, and maybe never. So I think that the next generation of supply chain professionals should be aware of that. And I have an operations research background myself. I would love to have it when I, finish my university education. But now is the time that you can use it. So that's very good to know. Yeah. So well, we can spend more and more. Good thing is we have an extra 30 minutes right after this. I hope you, the audience, have loved to listen to this, and there's a lot of stuff that might and will change the supply chain, especially with the supply chain design capabilities now available. So with this, Don, I would like to thank you for joining me in this kind of webinar podcast.
Martin, thank you so much for having me, and thanks everybody for tuning in. Look forward to continuing the conversation over there in our meeting room.
Yeah, right. So like this, I would like to wrap up, and thank you for listening, and maybe I will see you in another webinar. But for now, Don and I will be joining in the virtual lounge. So I hope to see you there. If not, I hope to see you virtually somewhere else or in live in an event. So thanks for now, and bye-bye, and I hope to see you in the virtual lounge. Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.